At home. I remain your mathematics instructor, JS1. My name remains Madam Blessing. Today, we are going to be looking at the topic three-dimensional shapes. First, we have to know what is a three-dimensional shape. Objects which have length, breadth, if you don't call it breadth, you call it width, and height, which can be measured, are called three-dimensional shapes or solid. If you don't call it three-dimensional shapes, you call it solid. Objects that have length, breadth, width are called three-dimensional shapes. And these three-dimensional shapes can be regular or irregular. Example, this is a cubeboard. It has three dimensions. It has the length, the height, and the breadth. The breadth talks about the deepness, how deep that object is. We want to identify these three-dimensional shapes which we are talking about. We say objects in the classroom or at home that can be touched and played with every day are three-dimensional shapes, which are, what are those objects? We talk about the cube, like the blackboard. The blackboard is a three-dimensional shape. You can see it in the classroom. Your duster is a three-dimensional shape. You can see it in the classroom. Your crayon is a three-dimensional shape. It can be found in the classroom. There are other objects like your drinking water. Your water container is a three-dimensional shape. The tin of milk you drink is a three-dimensional shape. Like this hair cream I'm holding is a three-dimensional shapes. Want to talk about properties of three-dimensional shapes. The outer view of a solid is known as its surface, where 2 points meet is called the vertex. One wants to talk about the property. This is a cube. We say the surface of it is called the face, while where 2 points meet is called the vertex, and the edge is called the edge. Example of a cube, this is a Maggi cube. Properties, all the sides are equal. Where the point meets is called the vertex, while here is the face. Same to that of a cubeboard. This is a cubeboard. This duster I'm holding is an example of a cubeboard. In the cubeboard, you have the face, you have the vertex. I said the vertex is where 2 points meet. Where these lines meet, this meeting point here is what is called the vertex, while the edge here is the side of the cubeboard. One of the properties of a cubeboard, one, the 6 faces are flat and they are equal. It has 6 square faces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The faces are equal. It has 12 edges. When you count the edges, you have 12 edges, and it has 8 vertices. Always remember that the vertex is the meeting point. Properties of the cubeboard is also similar with that of the cube. The difference is that of the cubeboard, the 6 faces are what? Rectangular. The 6 faces are rectangular, while that of a cube, the 6 faces is a square. It also has 12 edges and 8 vertices. That is for cubeboard. We have another example of a three-dimensional shape, which is what? The cylinder. This is an example of a cylinder. The tin has 2 circular faces. This container has 2 circular flat faces, the top and the bottom, and it has a curved face. The face is curved. This tin is an example of a three-dimensional shape. As I also said, your water bottle is also an example of a three-dimensional shape, and this shape is called a cylinder. The properties, the 2 faces are flat and they are circular. It has one curved face, it has two circular edges, and it has no vertex. There is no meeting point in the cylinder. Another property of a three-dimensional shape is a cone. Example of a cone is your pencil. The sharpened, the pointed points of your pencil is a three-dimensional shape. This is a crayon I'm holding. This is a three-dimensional shape, and this shape is called a cone. The point here is what I have drawn here, which is called the vertex, and this is the curved face of the surface, which is called the cone. So a crayon is an example of a cone. Like if mommy, if you go to market, you see these women that sells gari. That gari, when they put it and fill the basin, it forms a cone. That heap of the gari forms the cone. What are the properties of the cone? It has no vertex. It has no curved surface. It has no flat face. It has no circular edge. Properties of a cone. Let me repeat myself. It has one vertex. It has one curved surface. It has a circular flat face, and it has a circular edge. The next three-dimensional shape is a pyramid. Is what? A pyramid. I have drawn it here. And we have two types of pyramid, namely the rectangular base pyramid. Third property, the third three-dimensional shape we are talking about here is the cone. The cone. Example of a cone is this crayon that I'm holding. Your pencil you use in the classroom is an example of a cone. And in a cone, I told you that where the lines meet is what is called the vertex. So the vertex is this point. And one, it has a curved surface. This surface is curved. Another example of a cone is a basin of gari. A filled basin of gari, let me say a basin of gari. When you go to market, you see these market women that sells gari, they sell rice, they sell beans, they will heap it. So that heap forms a cone. And that is one of the three-dimensional shapes. We want to talk about the properties. What are the properties of a cone? One, it has only one vertex. That is one of the properties. Two, it has one curved surface. Three, it has one circular flat face, and it has a circular edge. That is the properties of a cone. Want to look at another example of a three-dimensional shape, which is what? The pyramid. We have two types of pyramid, namely the rectangular base pyramids and the square based pyramid. What are the properties of the pyramid? One, pyramid has two faces that depends on their shapes. It has faces that depends on their shapes. One, a rectangular base pyramid has a rectangle as its base. The one I have drawn here is a rectangular base pyramid. It has a rectangle as its base. The other one that is a square base pyramid, the base will have to be what? A square. Under a rectangle base pyramid, one, it has 5 faces, 4 triangular faces and 1 rectangle. 4 triangular faces and 1 rectangle. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the rectangle, making it 5. It has 8 edges. It has 8 edges. The edges are 8 and it has 5 vertices. That is the property of what? A rectangular base pyramid. Want to look at the second one. The number of sides the base of a pyramid has depends on the number of faces. The number of sides a base pyramid has depends on the number of faces. For instance, when the base of a pyramid has 5 sides, the number of faces is 6. If the sides are 5, the number of faces will be 6. When the base of a pyramid has 6 sides, the number of faces will be 7. If the sides are 6, the faces will be 7. The number of sides of the base also determines the number of edges. The number of sides determines the number of edges. We also have a sphere as a 3-dimensional shape. A sphere, what is the example of a sphere? Football. The football you play during your PE at school, you play football at home, is an example of a 3-dimensional shape. And the ping pong, this is a ping pong I'm holding. This ping pong is an example of a 3-dimensional shape. What are we saying? A sphere is a 3-dimensional shape that has no edges and no vertices. There is no edge, there is no meeting point, and there is no vertices. But it has a spherical surface. The face is what? Spherical. The face is what? Spherical. Spherical means round. So examples of these spheres are ball, the globe, and orange. Let me go back again. We are talking about 3-dimensional shapes. We said 3-dimensional shapes are shapes that have length, breadth, and height. And I told you that the height talks about the deepness of the 3-dimensional shape. So any shape that has the length, it has the length, it has the breadth, and it has the height. It's a 3-dimension. It's a 3-dimensional shape, if you can still remember. And I told you, how can you identify 3-dimensional shapes, things that you can see in the classroom. I told you that the blackboard is a 3-dimensional shape. The duster is a 3-dimensional shape. The soap, the bathing soap you use in bathing is a 3-dimensional shape. Your mommy's stove is a 3-dimensional shape. And we also talked about properties. We talked about the properties of a cube and a cuboid. I told you the only difference is that the face of the cube is square and the face of the cuboid is rectangular. But the properties are all the same. It all has 12 edges and 8 vertices, both for the cube and the cuboid. Don't forget. We also talked about cylinder. I said your tin of milk that you drink is a cylinder and it's a 3-dimensional shape. We said that it is circular, it has flat faces, it has curved face, it has circular edges, and it has no vertices. I also said that the cone, I also mentioned the crayon as an example of a cone, your pencil as an example of a cone. The heap of gari, the heap of rice is also an example of a cone. So with this, you'll be able to identify what a 3-dimension shape talks about. 3-dimension talks that it has the length, it has the breadth, and it has the height. We talked about the pyramid, that there are 2 types of pyramid, the rectangular base pyramid and the square base pyramid. It depends on the faces. The faces of the pyramid tells you the name of the pyramid. And we talked about the sphere, which is the ball, which is the ping pong, the globe, anything that is circular. It has no edge, it has no vertex, it has nothing. It only has a round face. That is a sphere. So today, we have come to the end of the lesson that talks about 3-dimensional shapes. For any comments and view, I want you to click on the web page and give your comments. You have an assignment there. You have to do your assignment and bring it back to the school. Thank you and remain blessed.